The tension was palpable, thick in the air like smoke, as Dutch Schultz's men waited for Bumpy Johnson to walk into the trap. They had been watching him for days now, carefully plotting, certain that this would be the moment. They knew the streets of Harlem better than anyone, and Harlem had always belonged to men like Bumpy. But Dutch had decided he was going to take it. Bumpy Johnson, Harlem's most powerful and respected figure, a man who had built an empire with nothing but grit and street smarts, was about to find out the hard way what it meant to cross someone with ambition as fierce as his own. The sound of footsteps echoed down the narrow alley, the crunch of boots against the cracked pavement cutting through the eerie silence. Bumpy's men were silent, poised, ready. But Bumpy, he moved like he always did, calm, collected, with that same quiet authority that made the world take notice. Then Dutch's men made their move. "Get him!" The command rang out, a signal that sent chaos into motion. But Bumpy was already one step ahead, his instincts sharper than the men that had tried to trap him. In the blink of an eye, he was on the offensive, his reputation for being the most dangerous man in Harlem unshakable. The flash of gunfire shattered the night, and just like that, the trap was sprung. Dutch Schultz, known for his ruthlessness and desire to expand his empire at any cost, had made a grave mistake. He'd underestimated Harlem's true king. What followed would become the stuff of legend. This wasn't just a battle over territory. It was about respect. And in Harlem, respect was worth more than gold. Bumpy Johnson had spent years carving out his dominion over Harlem. Born in 1905, he grew up in a time when the odds were stacked high against a black man trying to make something of himself in a world that was determined to keep him down. But Bumpy didn't see the world that way. He saw opportunity in every shadow, power in every word, and loyalty in the faces of those who stood by him. He was no stranger to the underworld. After his release from prison in the late 1930s, Bumpy aligned himself with some of the most influential crime figures of the time. But unlike the others, Bumpy never sought to rule through terror or brute force. Instead, he operated with a certain elegance, a quiet authority that made even the most ruthless respect him. It was this quality that allowed him to build a network of loyal soldiers and allies that stretched from the streets of Harlem to the corridors of power. But Harlem was not without its threats. The world was changing, and power dynamics were shifting in ways that no one could have predicted. The mafia, led by the likes of Dutch Schultz, was beginning to set its sights on Harlem, a territory that had long been a symbol of black pride and autonomy. Dutch Schultz, a mobster known for his violent streak and insatiable greed, was not the kind of man to settle for being second to anyone. He had heard the whispers about Bumpy's influence and his empire, and in true mobster fashion, he believed that the only way to gain respect was to take it, even if that meant bloodshed. But Harlem wasn't just another city. It was Bumpy's kingdom, and those who didn't respect that would find themselves in trouble. The community looked to Bumpy for more than just protection. He was a symbol of strength, resilience, and defiance. For the people of Harlem, Bumpy was a legend in the making, a man who had survived the worst of life and come out on top. And no one dared challenge that legend until Dutch Schultz came to town. Dutch Schultz was a man who didn't wait for opportunities to come to him. He created them. Harlem was on his radar, and he wasn't about to let some upstart like Bumpy Johnson stand in his way. He'd heard the rumors, seen the power Bumpy had amassed, and he figured it was time to remind everyone who was really in charge. The first move came in the form of a bold proposition. Dutch's men approached Bumpy, trying to intimidate him with offers of partnership. The streets of Harlem could be ours together, they said. But Bumpy wasn't having it. He knew Dutch's reputation all too well. He wasn't a man to make deals. He was a man to take. The next time they met, it was face to face. The tension in the room was immediate, like a storm waiting to break. Bumpy walked into the small, dimly lit room, his presence filling the space. Dutch, sitting at the head of the table, didn't stand to greet him. He never did. "You're the one they call Bumpy," Schultz said, his voice cold. "I've got a business proposition for you. You'd be a fool to turn it down." Bumpy didn't flinch. "I've built this empire from nothing," he said, his voice low but commanding. "I don't need anyone telling me how to run it." Dutch smiled, a sly grin that didn't reach his eyes. "We both know that you've been running it for years, but how much longer do you think you can keep the other sharks at bay? You think the Italians are gonna just sit around and let you call the shots?" Bumpy's eyes narrowed, his grip on his cane tightening. "You don't understand, Dutch. Harlem is mine. You can't take what's already been built." But Dutch wasn't backing down. He leaned in, his voice rising. "You think you're untouchable, huh? We'll see about that." And with that, the war was declared. The war that began with words would soon erupt into violence. Harlem, a neighborhood that had once been a symbol of black pride and autonomy, was now a battleground. The tension between Dutch Schultz and Bumpy Johnson had reached a boiling point, and the time for negotiation was over. Now it was about dominance, and the stakes were as high as they could get. Days passed, and both men prepared for the inevitable. Dutch, using his resources, began to move against Bumpy's operations, cutting into his businesses, attempting to push his men off the streets. But Bumpy, the legend he had become, didn't take threats lightly. He'd built his empire with blood and sweat, and he wasn't about to let some outsider come in and take it from him without a fight. Bumpy knew how to read the streets like no one else. His network of informants was vast, stretching into every corner of Harlem. When Dutch's men made their first move to muscle in on a local speakeasy, Bumpy's crew was already there, waiting. A gunfight broke out, the roar of gunshots filling the air, but Bumpy's men held their ground. It was a message. Harlem was not for sale. But Dutch was a man who didn't give up easily. He retaliated with brutal force, sending his enforcers to burn down Bumpy's warehouses, destroy his businesses, and send a message to the people who followed him. "No one defies me," Dutch said to his men, a bitter, dangerous edge to his words. The confrontation finally came to a head one fateful night in late 1935. It was in a dark alley near 125th Street, the heart of Harlem's underworld. The streets were quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. Bumpy's men had gathered, awaiting orders, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of trouble. Dutch, a few paces ahead, had his men in position ready to strike. The air was thick with tension, but Bumpy was unshaken. He walked into the alley, his figure cutting through the shadows like a ghost. He wasn't running, he wasn't hiding. This was his domain, and he would not be intimidated. As Bumpy approached, he locked eyes with Dutch, standing in the center of his men. Dutch's hand rested on his pistol, ready to draw at any moment. The streetlights above cast long shadows, and for a moment, neither man moved. The silence hung heavy, a moment of stillness before the storm. Then Dutch broke the silence, his voice rising above the calm. "You're making a mistake, Johnson. You think you can stand against me?" He pulled out his gun, his finger hovering over the trigger. "I run this town now." But Bumpy didn't flinch. His eyes were cold, calculating. He took a step forward, slowly, deliberately. "No," he said, his voice like steel. "You're the one who's made the mistake. This town belongs to the people who respect it, not the ones who try to take it." In that moment, Bumpy's men surged forward, moving with lightning speed, their guns drawn. Dutch's men reacted, chaos erupting in the alley. Shots rang out, the deafening roar of gunfire echoing off the walls. Bumpy was in motion, his presence commanding the battlefield. He was the storm, and Dutch Schultz's men were the ones caught in it. The confrontation escalated quickly, but it wasn't just a fight of guns and blood. It was a fight for respect, and Bumpy knew that he couldn't afford to lose this. As the gunfire subsided, Dutch found himself pinned against a wall, the barrel of Bumpy's gun pressed to his temple. "Here's your message," Bumpy said, his voice steady, unshaken by the chaos around him. "Harlem doesn't belong to you. It never will." The fight had ended, but the message had been made clear. Dutch Schultz had made the grave error of underestimating Bumpy Johnson, and now the legend had proven why he was untouchable. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Harlem was shaken, but not broken. News of what had transpired spread quickly through the streets, and it didn't take long for the people to recognize the significance of what had just occurred. Dutch Schultz had come to Harlem, intending to take what was his. But in the end, it wasn't his power that had prevailed. It was Bumpy's. Dutch's men were scattered, defeated, and humiliated. The streets of Harlem were once again under Bumpy's control, but more than that, the people's loyalty had been solidified. Bumpy was their king, the man who had stood tall against a powerful enemy and sent a message to the world. No one was taking Harlem from them. For the people of Harlem, it wasn't just about the physical battle that had been fought in that alley. It was about what it represented. It was about the fight for dignity, for respect, and for power. Bumpy Johnson had shown the world that, in Harlem, authority was earned, not taken. As the weeks passed, the respect for Bumpy grew even stronger. The men who had once been hesitant to align with him now flocked to his side. They knew that anyone who dared challenge Bumpy would face the same fate as Dutch Schultz: defeat and humiliation. Bumpy didn't gloat. He didn't revel in the violence. He knew better than to let his guard down. But he also knew that he had cemented his place in Harlem's legacy. The balance of power had shifted, and the streets, the people, and the world knew that the name Bumpy Johnson would forever be synonymous with strength, honor, and untouchable power. The events of that fateful night in Harlem were not just a momentary victory. They were the culmination of Bumpy Johnson's life's work, a symbol of his rise from the depths of Harlem's streets to its undisputed king. His actions had reverberated through the community, shifting the power dynamics in a way that would have lasting consequences for years to come. The aftermath of the showdown with Dutch Schultz cemented Bumpy's legendary status in the underworld and in Harlem itself. The streets whispered of his strength, not just in battle, but in his ability to inspire loyalty and respect from those who followed him. He had become more than just a criminal. He had become a symbol, a man who could stare down any threat, any challenge, and walk away victorious. Harlem, for all its troubles, was his kingdom, and Bumpy ruled it with a quiet authority that commanded the respect of both his allies and his enemies. No one could deny the power he held over the streets, the businesses, and the people. His network of contacts, from local store owners to influential political figures, ensured that his influence stretched far beyond the confines of the neighborhood. He wasn't just a figurehead. He was the pulse of Harlem, a man whose word could sway the course of events, whose presence could shift the balance of power. But his legacy wasn't solely defined by violence or the throne of Harlem he held. It was in the way he walked among the people, with dignity and purpose. Bumpy was not a tyrant. He was a protector. He kept the streets in line, provided protection for those who needed it, and fought for the survival of Harlem's black community in a world that continually sought to suppress it. His relationship with those around him was built on respect, not fear. The loyalty of his men was unshakable because they knew Bumpy didn't just lead them into battle. He led them with honor. And in return, the streets of Harlem respected him not because they feared him, but because they understood that his victories were their victories. His rise wasn't just personal. It was a reflection of their collective strength, their resilience against a world that sought to keep them down. The impact of that night, when Bumpy stood face to face with Dutch Schultz and declared that Harlem was untouchable, rippled through every corner of the city. People who had once hesitated to side with Bumpy now flocked to him. His name became synonymous with power, but it was power rooted in something deeper: justice. By defeating Schultz, Bumpy had shown Harlem's underworld and its power brokers that the old rules didn't apply. The mafia might have had its influence, but Harlem had its own king, and his rule was not to be questioned. The message was clear. Anyone who dared to cross him would find themselves facing not just Bumpy's wrath, but the wrath of an entire community that had seen firsthand what happened when they stood together. In the years that followed, Bumpy's reputation only grew. He became a legend, a figure whose name would be remembered long after his time had passed. Even as new threats emerged and the world around him changed, Bumpy Johnson's place in Harlem's history was solidified. His victory over Dutch Schultz was not just a moment of personal triumph. It was a defining chapter in the struggle for black empowerment, a moment where one man's refusal to back down became a victory for an entire people. And as for Dutch Schultz, he never truly recovered from the humiliation. The mafia moved on, but the taste of defeat lingered, a constant reminder of the power Bumpy held. A power that no amount of money, no matter how much violence or intimidation was employed, could ever undermine. In the end, Bumpy Johnson's legendary status wasn't just forged in the streets of Harlem. It was shaped by his unyielding refusal to be intimidated, to be pushed aside by those who thought they could control him. His victory over Dutch Schultz wasn't about money, power, or territory. It was about respect. It was about proving that when you stand firm in your principles, when you fight for what's rightfully yours, no one can take it from you. For the people of Harlem, that moment would live on forever. It was a reminder that sometimes one person's stand can change the course of history. It wasn't just about a mobster trying to take control of a neighborhood. It was about a man who refused to let the world dictate his fate. A man who stood tall, fought back, and earned the respect of his community. This wasn't just about one man's pride. This was about a community's dignity. And sometimes it takes a legend to remind the world what respect really means. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a figure in the streets of Harlem. He was a force of nature, a man whose impact would echo through history, forever tied to the rise of Harlem as a symbol of strength, resilience, and unwavering defiance. The streets of Harlem, so often a battleground for power, would never be the same after Bumpy Johnson's stand against Dutch Schultz. What started as a clash between two men, one driven by greed, the other by a sense of justice, ended up defining an era, creating a legend whose name would echo through time. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a man of the streets. He was a symbol of something much larger. A symbol of the strength that rises from struggle, of the unbroken spirit that refuses to bend in the face of oppression. His fight wasn't merely against Dutch Schultz. It was against a world that had long sought to crush the ambitions and dignity of the people he represented. The battle in that dark alley was more than just a moment of confrontation. It was a moment that told the world something powerful. Harlem could not and would not be taken. In the years that followed, Bumpy's name became legendary, but his legacy wasn't built on his empire of crime or the power he wielded. It was built on his commitment to his people. He never lost sight of the fact that respect was the foundation of everything. Whether it was his careful leadership of Harlem streets or his loyalty to those who supported him, Bumpy proved time and again that it wasn't the size of the fight in the man, but the size of the man in the fight. The story of Bumpy Johnson's war with Dutch Schultz was more than just the clash of two titans of the underworld. It was the triumph of a man who understood that in the face of adversity, when all odds are stacked against you, true strength lies not in overwhelming force, but in the quiet, unwavering resolve to protect what is yours, and to do so with honor. Harlem never forgot what Bumpy Johnson did for them. His victory was their victory. His respect was their respect. His rise was a testament to the power of unity, the strength that comes when a community stands together, unwavering in the face of any challenge. And so, the legend of Bumpy Johnson was born, a story that would be told in hushed tones, reverberating through the streets of Harlem for generations to come. Because in the end, this wasn't just about one man. This was about an entire community's struggle for respect and dignity in a world that too often sought to strip them of both. Bumpy Johnson stood tall and unyielding, reminding everyone who came after him what it meant to truly be untouchable.